Wenceslas looked out on the feast of Stephen, when the snow lay round about, deep and crisp and
It's time. Merry Christmas, you filthy animals, and welcome back to the annual tradition that is my top 25 ranking list. And after a somewhat sedate 2023, 2024 was a big step up. A slew of new parks along with some long overdue re-rides on some old favorites, 29 new coasters, that's it, including milestone 200 on the legendary Ravine Flyer 3. And I even went across the pond to visit Europa Park. Well, I planned to, and then I didn't. Feel free to yell obscenities at me in the comments below, and don't worry, there will be some international fun coming up in the very near future. I covered a lot of ground this year, in fact 2,500 miles of it. My 10-day Thuzy road trip took me from Philly to Indiana and back with so many parks in between. It was ambitious, it was epic, it was exhausting, and it was great. I can't wait to do another, but that will have to wait. Now the air has turned crisp, and the sun has hidden behind the bare branched trees. Riding season has come to a close. It is time to turn from experience to reminiscence. So let's look back on the year in coasters, the ups and downs of fresh experiences, and how some new heavy hitters have shaken up my rankings. Is X2 still on top after a slew of night rides? How much do I actually like the voyage? Hop in, strap in your seatbelts, and lower your restraint just enough to clear the verify. It is time for my top 25 roller coasters 2024 edition. Right. Now, let's hop in with a little speed through of my top 50, highlighting my new credits. I'm very happy that the Bat lived up to the hype, especially in the front row. Commendable pacing, some wild swings, and strong positives, especially on that helix, smooth as silk as well. I need to get up to Canada and ride Vortex stat. Not a new credit by any means, but let's have a moment of silence for a fallen legend. Criminally slept on and highly underrated. It's short, but the Raven is chock full of airtime and laterals with an utterly charming setting. It's got some of the best drops around on a trad woody, especially that great first drop, and the legendary fourth drop plunge into the frenetic beast-like second half. Okay, I just want to bitch about this one real quick. You would think that the new control system would make the ride better, and it does marginally improve the first half, but for some godforsaken reason they decided to turn up the mid-course, which, like, what the hell? The wood coaster at its best, at least for 2/3 of the layout. If it didn't absolutely die at the end and at that turnaround, Ravine Flyer 2's prodigious display of pacing, airtime, and laterals would probably vault it up into the top 25. This woody combines the out-of-control sensation you get from a GCI with some actual force, and I love it. Now, this thing is just pure fun. With the launches and the rotating cars, Guardians is a Disney coaster that's actually fun and engaging, and it even gives some small airtime pops in the back. It's long, and you definitely get your weight's worth. Thankfully, the wait is made vastly more tolerable by the well-themed queue, even if the theming is utterly incomprehensible on ride. Or maybe that's because I was sauced when I wrote it. I don't know. Alright, finally time to hop into my top 25. But first, bad news. An independent investigation of this year's chaotic Holiwood Nights ticket lottery by my sources has revealed that over half the promised tickets have been stolen by none other than Salim Basool, intent on seizing the Holiday World property and folding it into his newly birthed Cedar Flags megacorporation. This heartless act of subterfuge has left thousands of hungry and destitute Thuzies without a place to live over Memorial Day weekend. Please like this video and subscribe to the channel so I can raise the necessary funds to commission the Gravity Group and build a shelter to provide housing for these orphan Thuzies in their time of need. Thank you. Oh man, a bit of a drop for what still remains my favorite B&M Hyper. D-Back just didn't really have as much of the sauce this year, despite multiple best-case rides in the boiling heat. Still, it barely hangs on to my status as my favorite B&M Hyper. Those long white trains, I just love them so much. Even with more subdued airtime, it manages to whip you out of your seat for seconds at a time. And KI needs to trim this thing a little less, and it can make a deep run. Another pretty decent drop, this time from King's Dominion's Pocket Rocket. With awesomely strong airtime and solid pacing, Timbers is no slouch, but its lack of height is quite noticeable, and exposure to more and more RMCs makes the ride experience feel less special to me. Still, there's plenty to like about Twisted Timbers. Its sweet and whippy barrel roll drop, the delightful ejector hill trio, which is the definite highlight of the ride, and the floaty inversions that manage to successfully break up the chaos of the rest of the layout. Not one of my favorite RMCs anymore, but it's still a damn good ride, especially given the footprint. Oh man, Tatsu at night is just something special. The layout is beautiful as it weaves and twists above the mountain, dancing with airborne pirouettes. It tends more to grace than ripping off your face, apart from one specific moment I'll talk about briefly, but despite its general lack of force, no other flyer quite replicates the sensation of flight just like Tatsu. It's almost liberating and truly special. And then of course comes the pretzel loop, which I still contend is not as punishing as the Superman clones, but it easily remains the powerful, seemingly interminable highlight of this awesome B&M flyer. Yes, I've decided to join the Thuzy sheep on this one. Orion is indeed the best coaster at Kings Island. Hotter days gave me better rides, and this time I could really feel the incredible speed of this B&M sorta Giga. Despite that, I still feel like Orion is missing a little something. It's fast, and it certainly has its highlights, but I just wish it were more forceful in general, from that first drop to the limp wave turn and the somewhat pointless helix. And then there are moments like the absolutely bonkers speed hill and the wildly snappy ejector pops into the brake run. Like why can't the whole ride be like this? These moments and the incredible pacing are worth the price of admission, but Orion is still my least favorite Giga. Pour one out, folks. Despite driving directly past Knott's Berry Farm this September, I unfortunately did not have the time to stop in and get some laps on what was my favorite traditional wooden coaster. And that's a shame, because I love Ghost Rider. This CCI has solid and decently strong airtime throughout. I think it's a little bit overhyped, but it's still good. But what really left an impression on me is its chaotic pacing and fierce laterals. People always talk about GCIs feeling out of control. Nah, fam, this is what an out-of-control Woody feels like. From drop to brakes, you are at Ghost Rider's mercy, and it only seems to speed up as it continues, diving into the dense thicket of its own superstructure. I know I had some heavy hitters joining my wood coaster list in 2024, but I was confident that Ghost Rider would continue to place well. It is a masterpiece. That said, Ghost Rider couldn't keep up. Everyone fawns over the voyage, and based on its stat line alone, it's not hard to understand why. But the tragedy of Holiday World is that their headlining attraction overshadows their incredible supporting cast, and no ride is a greater victim of this than the Legend. This thing is incredible. The Legend's prodigious display of lateral force makes Twister at Knoebels, my former barometer for a lateral-focused Woody, look like child's play. From the moment you plunge off that drop and dive into the wilderness, the Legend never lets up, tossing you around like a rag doll and pinning you to the side of the train for seconds at a time. The mid-layout double helix, rising and falling as it throws you out like the crest of a rogue wave, has etched itself into my mind in the best possible way. And there are some legitimately good moments of solid airtime too, which caught me completely by surprise on my first rides. Now that being said, the airtime is not that consistent. That's the one flaw with this ride, but given its sheer length, the number of weak hills does leave a bit of a negative impression. That said, if the Legend did have more consistent airtime, this thing would probably be my favorite wooden coaster in the world. It's that good. Guys, I can't believe it. It actually happened. After years of trying, I finally got a duel on Twisted Colossus. Well, kind of. It was like half a train off, and we were sitting in the back, so we actually never really overlapped with our sparring partner, but it was close enough. That's the best I'm going to get. That isn't the reason why Twisted Colossus has risen, though. It just gave a really good ride this year. While it still feels like two half-finished coasters slapped together, Twisted Colossus just felt way more forceful than it had in my previous experiences. Those first two drops are absolutely delectable, and the airtime throughout feels stronger and more drawn out than what Twisted Timbers has to offer. It is still a deeply flawed ride, and I always come to the end of each half feeling like there's just something missing, but I have a lot more respect for this awesome RMC now. Montu, oh how I love you. I didn't get a chance to reevaluate this year, but my glorious experiences from the year prior are happily seared into my memory. Montu delivers crushing positive Gs and some of the greatest whip in the world. The erotic display of power shown by the Batwing alone would probably be enough to vault this thing up into my top 25, but almost every element pops, benefiting even further from the subterranean snaking of the second half. There are some notable and lengthy dead spots, which keeps it a little bit further down in my top 25, but it can be forgiven because, like, how is the friggin' drop off the mid-course so good? Montu might just be the peak of old school B&M. The more I lap Hershey Park's newest edition, the more I grow to appreciate just how well Joe Draves and Rocky Mountain Construction did, transforming this sorry excuse for a Woody into a truly elite ride, for the most part. Wildcat's Revenge has airtime in spades, a wonderfully powerful first drop, one truly epic sustained airtime hill, and a solid run of actually whippy inversions peppered within a flurry of flighty flying airtime. Starting with the reverse Cobra roll though, the finale hurts the ride a good bit, vacillating between somewhat sluggish pacing and inexcusably painful mini hills that decorate that horrid finale. But I can't complain too much when the rest of the ride is so good. Truly, us Hershey Parkers have been blessed with a ride that has turned Chocolate Town into a bona fide thuzy destination. Oh man, this one hurts, but I think it's time. It's been long enough since I've had a truly great ride on Millie, so it's finally dropping out of my top 15. But don't get me wrong, I still love this ride, and it seems like some of the other people I went to Cedar Point with this year got some great rides, so I don't know, maybe I just got unlucky. Incredible speed, some solid positives in whip, and a delightful setting with god-tier trains and one of the best first drops in the industry, even 25 years later. There's a lot to like about Millie, but absent a truly special night ride, the thuzy calls of Millennium Forceless have begun to echo through my mind. Like many of you, Millennium Force holds a very special place in my heart. It is a landmark coaster, a truly inspiring attraction that never fails to unleash the 5-year-old in me. And though its airtime and forces continue to look weaker and weaker as the years go by, it is still an amazing coaster. Curious why Twisted Timbers nearly tumbled out of my top 25? Well, this thing is the reason why. Storm Chaser has a reputation as one of the most savage RMCs out there, and my god, I cannot agree more. The layout of this thing borders on parody, even if it rides this thin tightrope dangerously close to the chasm of the uncomfortable. But Storm Chaser carries just enough sustain through its hills to be tolerable, and so I'm more than happy to loop this coked out monster. Like Twisted Timbers and the other smaller scale RMCs, the main flaw with Storm Chaser is its height. It certainly doesn't feel like it wants for pacing, but some extra length and more sustained airtime moments would really vaunt this ride to elite status. But Storm Chaser doses its riders with an incredible shot of adrenaline, and at points it really feels like you're ringing through the eye of an actual tornado. Not that I ever want to test that theory out, but this ride is good enough. Honestly, I don't even feel qualified to speak on Lightning Rod right now. Not only has it been 2 years since I last went to Dollywood, but in that time frame, the once unprecedented Woody has undergone a dramatic transformation. The iconic and problematic launch has been replaced with a goddamn chain lift? Like, come on. I almost feel like I should recuse myself. But I can, however, tell you what Lightning Rod was like back in 2022, and it kicked ass. I love that launch. It was so unique, and the uphill run made it quite punchy. But even after crawling over that pre-drop, Lightning Rod was a treat, with backroad pacing, great airtime, and one of the most iconic finales ever in the legendary quad down. I almost don't want to go back to Dollywood because I know it'll irreparably alter my relationship with Lightning Rod, but someday I'm sure I will. And when that happens, I don't expect to see this thing in my top 25 anymore. Alright, let me tell you guys something shocking. A Phantom's Revenge night ride is really good. This year, I finally got to experience the Franken Morgan past sunset, and it lived up to all my expectations. One of the most bizarre coasters ever created, Phantom oozes character like a saturated sponge. A sponge being crushed by the insane positive G's that this hyper offers in spades. I might actually prefer the bone-crushing positives at the bottom of that crazy ravine drop to Phantom's legendary second half flurry of airtime, but the nice thing is, you don't have to choose. Every hill after piercing through Thunderbolt in the return run offers comical ejector, some of the strongest airtime around, while the only thing keeping you from flying into the river is a pool noodle. A Phantom did trim noticeably harder this year, which sucks, and there are some weak moments like the limp first drop that cannot even touch its nearly identical cousin found on its older brother in Valencia, California. But despite its flaws, Phantom is still in the conversation for the best coaster in an absolutely stacked Pennsylvania. I love this thing. It's weird, but the steadily aging Maverick somehow grows on me year after year, like it gave me Thuzy toxoplasmosis or something. Almost 2 decades after its debut, the world is saturated with a litany of small-scale launch coasters that have all sucked from the teat of Maverick, but the original remains the best. This year, even the second half was absolutely throwing me out of my seat, and I usually find it a bit underwhelming. Every hill in Maverick's deceptively compact layout offers amazing ejector with way better sustain than you would expect from hills this size. The positives through those impossibly tight turns are delightful, and Maverick has that whip that only 2000s era Intamin seems capable of making. Throw in a punchy launch and the OG Blitz really has it all. If it were taller and it didn't have one of the most egregious sets of trims in the entire world, Maverick just might be top 10 worthy. That's how much I'm growing to like this thing. I didn't get back to BGT this year, rip Scorpion I guess, which means I did not get a redemption ride on the oft-filleted Iron Gwazi. So all I have to judge this titanic hybrid is a single lap early in the day, cold as the corpse of the Schwarzkopf that was once its neighbor. I know such a ride is no way to judge a coaster, but in the absence of more experience, it's what I have to work with, and what I saw was pretty damn good. The gimped first drop still pisses me off to this day, but even while it was warming up in the bullpen, Iron Gwazi absolutely tore through its course. The Royal Purple RMC never lets its foot off the gas, and the fact that it finishes with a full head of steam is a benefit in my mind, making highlights like the death roll and the delectable sideways overbank stand out like they should. Unlike Steel Vengeance, this thing doesn't overstay its welcome. Everything felt a little bit subdued for my liking, at least when I rode it, but I can almost guarantee that if I rode this thing fully warmed up, I would rank it higher. Hopefully that day will come soon. And we start off our top 10 with Velocicoaster. This ride just might be the ultimate victim of recency bias. It's been over 3 years since I last took a lap on the Intamin, and the freshness of the ride experience is all but gone. That's really the only thing in my mind that's causing Velocicoaster to slide down the rankings year after year. Look, I know, it's an incredible ride, While Velocicoaster does everything well, there isn't a single moment that sticks out of my mind that has me clamoring to get back to Islands and ride it again. Maybe when I ride it again, I'll remember just how powerful the insane Mosasaurus roll is. Maybe the shocking punch of the launches will surprise me in a good way. And maybe the solid airtime throughout the long, wide-ranging, and varied layout will reinforce that this is indeed the platonic idea of the roller coaster, vaulted even higher in the hearts and minds of enthusiasts with its well-integrated and commendable theming. I'll get back there. Eventually. Universal is just like really, really crowded. Okay, fine, you win. The Voyage is great. Great enough to sneak into my top 10. Enthusiasts will never shut the hell up about this thing, and I'm tired of listening to the broken record of compliments skipping around endlessly. But I can't deny that the Voyage is something truly special. I wasn't initially this high on the ride. In fact, my first 2 rides were pretty underwhelming, and in my vlog I claimed the Legend to be the superior experience at the beginning. But as the day went on, the Voyage warmed up like a lockdown closer in the bullpen, and by the time it was throwing fastballs down the plate in the 9th inning, I could barely keep up. The pacing is just masterful. I expected the B&M Hyper S start to be the highlight for me, but I was surprised to find myself the most drawn to the savage middle section, bobbing and weaving through the forest in the physical manifestation of what enthusiasts tell me Mystic Timbers is. The final leg, post-mid-course, is a little less intense, but the sense of speed never really drops, and the chaotic station surround at the end of the ride is an awesome way to close out the experience. It didn't take too long for the Voyage to win me over, and every lap around its 1.2-mile circuit made me fall in love with the ride more and more. Now, I don't think the Voyage is the second coming of Christ. However, I could see how it could become that. I don't think the mid-course trims being off would have that much of effect, but a night ride on this beast, plunging headfirst into the unlit wilderness with all of that force, is probably magical. And I'm ashamed to say this, but the prospect of the ultimate Voyage night ride was enough to get me to Holiwood Nights next year. That said, maybe this is just my personal bias, and maybe this is just my fierce loathing of Voyage fanboys showing, but the king of the Woodies, at least for me, remains the Raging Bull. Yes, the Voyage is longer, yes, the Voyage has more variety, and yes, the Voyage has a better setting, but nothing on the Voyage can touch the first drop in 2 camelbacks in El Toro, never mind the insanity of the Rolling Thunder Hill. Those moments are the stuff of legend, and for good reason. I feel like Toro's like running even faster this year. The drop off the turnaround is giving legit flowjector in the back, and my night rides in October gave me the first good airtime I had on that final S-Hill in years. That said, Toro is still a very flawed experience, and it only seems to get rougher and rougher with every passing year. I had my hopes, like many of you, that the new Cedar Flags mega corporation would give this icon a great adventure the love and care it deserves, but we're all seeing how that's turning out. Let's just hope that the bull doesn't meet the fate of its next door neighbor anytime soon. Now, I didn't add a lot of great B&Ms to my tally this year, but even if I did, Fury was in no danger of losing the top spot. The massive Giga is Bulliger and Mabillard's undisputed high watermark. It's long, smooth, and surprisingly forceful, with Intamin-level pacing and a spectacular finale that makes me wonder why B&M can't make airtime this good on their other rides. The middle section after the Hive Dive is still a pretty glaring weak spot, but the rest of the ride is basically perfect, and it is glass smooth to boot, which is not something you can take as a given with B&Ms anymore. It's been a hot second since I've been on Fury, and so it's probably not surprising to see it slip down the rankings. I owe it to myself to get back to Carowinds soon and remind myself just why Fury is so loved. I do contend, as do many of you, that it is B&M's masterpiece. The latest subject of my 35-minute elegies remains exactly where it was before, just outside of the top 5. And given how much Skyrush has changed, it's pretty funny to see it's in the exact same place. The new restraints may have put the slightest damper on the airtime, but they are wildly more comfortable, and the impact on the ride experience is barely perceptible in my mind. The thigh crush restraints never really bothered me that much anyway. What keeps Skyrush on the cusp of pure greatness, as it did before, is the ride experience. Skyrush remains a bundle of contradictions, a few bland turnarounds and weak snaps, linking together some of the greatest airtime moments on the planet. The first drop in the back is peerless, and that speed hill immediately following is an exemplar of sustained ejector airtime. Skyrush carries strong momentum through even its weaker moments, and the elite parts of the ride are more than enough for me to forgive its sins, even if it is a bit too flawed and a bit too short to ever crack the top 5. It's just such a characterful ride, and its great moments are so powerful and so unique that Skyrush will always have a special place in my heart. Whoa, hey, Steel Vengeance at number 5? A former number 1 falling this low? Yes, I'm starting to think a little bit less of Steve, but I do not support the sudden turn that enthusiasts have made this year against what was once a consensus pick for the world's greatest coaster. Steve is still amazing, and nothing about its ride experience justifies the sudden backlash against the original Hyper Hybrid.
Except maybe that last lap, but that's a different...
The first 2/3 of Steve are basically perfect. An incredible ejector-filled first drop leads into 2 of the best wave turns ever created, each with their own unique personality. The coaster never lets up after this point as Steve weaves through its structure, flipping its riders and tossing them out of their seats like a wild Mustang. Once it drops into the superstructure for its infamous 3rd lap, I begin to sour a bit on the ride experience. That last lap is just too small and jerky for its own good, but I'll put up with those stupid bumps to experience the incredible perfection that is the first 2 laps of this ride. Many new contenders have entered the ring since Steve first shocked the world, but the Hyper Hybrid is still throwing punches with the best of them. Just because it's getting older does not mean you should write Steve off. And speaking of... Still the king of the hypers, baby. Magnum was the perfect cap-off to my crazy road trip, the namesake of my channel and a perennial fave. This year I had the pleasure of experiencing what was perhaps the ultimate Magnum experience, a pitch-black, late-night front-row zen ride with the trims turned completely off. Unfortunately, I was a little bit too sauced to truly savor the moment, but hey, it was still something special. There's not much to say about Magnum that I haven't said before. Do you want the world's strongest airtime coupled with incredible views and some hilarious profiling? Look no further. It's characterful, it's fast, it's relatively comfortable given its savagery, and it tries to throw you into the sky. The hypers that have propped up in its wake are certainly more refined, but Magnum's pure rawness keeps me coming back, even 35 years after its original opening. Magnum is far more than just a piece of coaster history. It is a singular experience, and Ron Toomer's greatest achievement. Or is it? Yes, this ranking is completely serious. One of the biggest disappointments of my 2024 road trip was Viper at Darien Lake, the Arrow Looper I had been eagerly anticipating for the past few years. Darien Lake's Viper promised to be a redemption for the Looper model, which was beginning to hold less cachet for me after a number of meh rides on less seminal Arrow Loopers. Many consider Darien Lake's Viper to be one of the best Arrow Loopers still standing, but it wasn't. Viper's experience was barely enough to scrape the literal dregs of my top 100, and I stepped off the ride feeling rather disappointed. I began to worry to myself, maybe Arrow Loopers aren't actually as good as I made them out to be. Maybe Viper at Magic Mountain, the roller coaster that I had heralded as my favorite for years, wasn't actually as good as I said. And then I returned to Magic Mountain and got back on the other Viper. Thank God I was wrong. Like, holy shit, this ride is on another level. As the park plunged into darkness and I hopped in the back car of this nearly 200-foot tall beast, I was reminded just why I'd endlessly sung this ride's praises. The first half is absolutely relentless. The long first drop throws wicked laterals at you, and the loops try to literally fold your body in like a sheet of paper. Viper is running faster than it ever had before, leading to incredible laterals on the turnaround and even stronger trash compactor positives on two of the whippiest loops on Earth. Then, generously, the ride ops brought the ferocious Serpent to a dead stop on the mid-course. This is one of those rides where that's a good thing. Viper's post-mid-course dance was just as good as I remembered. The bizarre float, twist, whip, hang time of the slow Batwing in the back car is utterly masterful. Viper was running so fast that the corkscrews were a bit quick for my liking, but that's a trade-off I'm willing to take for the utter savagery of the rest of the layout. And it made the surprise delightful laterals from the station dive an even more hilarious coda to this glorious symphony of twisted metal. And did I mention the ejector pops too? I very much understand that Viper is not everyone's cup of tea. The ride tracks well, and there are very few bad transitions. I bristle up against anyone who claims that the ride is rough, but the forces are just so savage that it can throw your head around like a rag doll and beat your body down. If you don't brace yourself on those loops, Viper will quite literally throw a haymaker at you. But like Prime Mike Tyson, Viper at its best is a true sight to behold. Even more than Magnum, Viper's ride experience is incredibly unique. Its old school character is entirely inimitable, and that's why I absolutely adore it. Long may it live. A huge victory for its next door neighbor, but I wish that I could say my former number one, the mighty X2, was so lucky. Despite another round of glorious night rides, Arrow's final statement has given up the gold. So how did X2 lose its grip on the top spot? It just wasn't as good this year. The roughness got a little more jarring, still not ride-breaking. It just wasn't as forceful as I remembered it. Maybe I'm just getting used to the ride now after so many laps, and the novelty is wearing off. I can't really say for sure. But these were pitch black, summertime, hot night rides. I don't think you could possibly get better than that, so I'm feeling okay with dropping this down a rung. This does not mean, by any stretch of the imagination, that I no longer like X2. It is an absolute masterpiece. The first drop in the back is still the greatest drop in the world, and the pull-out positives are punishing. Like its older brother next door, X2 has no qualms treating its riders like putty in the hand. The end product is extremely chaotic, and you can barely understand which way you're going, but amidst the chaos of its layout come moments of bizarre peace. Floating around in the air, no way to tell which way is up or down, just letting your body give in to the whims of this machine that bounces around like a living, breathing thing. X2 is still an incredible roller coaster, and I absolutely love it. But there was one ride this year that I liked a little bit better.
Awesome.
Start your engines for one last glory ride. I-305 has stormed through the field yet again and reclaimed the top step of the podium after falling to second place last year. I finally made it back to King's Dominion this summer, and some fresh laps on Dale Earnhardt's Revenge was all I needed to remind me why I held this ride in such high regard. Well, what changed? Honestly, not that much. There were two main factors that drove I-305 back to the top. Firstly, like I mentioned before, I thought X2 slipped a little bit. But secondly, I felt like I needed a fresh experience to remind me just how insane this thing truly is. This year, I spent probably 100 hours making a gushing hagiography for this demented attraction, but no amount of ink spilled on paper can adequately express just what this thing does to your body. I don't need to go into the nitty-gritty. If you want my detailed opinions on this ride, please go watch my 35-minute long elegy. But to sum things up, Intimidator 305 remains the most brutal coaster on this goddamn planet. The positives are soul-sucking, the whips are otherworldly, the pacing is furious, and from drop to brakes it's a non-stop blitz of speed, positives, and ejector airtime.
Outside of that stupid trim.
It's pretty short for a Giga, but that's probably a good thing. I never fail to come off of Intamin's 305-foot-tall display of hubris utterly breathless. And despite how inadvisable it is for my health, I never fail to hop back in the line again until I am a blithering mess who can barely walk straight. This ride just it does things to you. There are very good reasons why a ride like I-305 has not been made again in the 15 years since its debut. This ride does not appeal to the common man. I-305's birth was a colossal error. In fact, it remains Intamin's greatest mistake. But thank God they made it. Intimidator 305 was a true testament to Dale Earnhardt's legacy, and as it enters the next stage of its life, I hope it can continue to beat its riders to a pulp for decades to come. And that's all, folks. Thank you for tuning in to this year's Top 25. I already have some fun trips planned for next year, and I'm looking forward to get my first international credits. What do you think of this list? You think something is too low or too high? Will Holiwood Nights vault the voyage to even greater heights? Am I absolutely deranged for putting Viper in my top 3? Comment below, like the video, and subscribe to the channel if you haven't already, and have a very Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year.